This week, the end of an era. Washington Secretary of Corrections Cheryl Strange reflects on a career helming some of Washington's most high-profile and high-risk agencies and institutions. The lessons learned, the accomplishments achieved, the work yet undone.
From the TBW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
And welcome to Inside Olympia. My guest this week has seen it all and done it all, at least in the areas of human services and corrections. She's helmed some of the most high-profile state agencies and institutions, navigated crisis, faced criticism and praise, and now she's preparing to retire as a new administration prepares to take office. Joining me now, and for the full hour this week for an exit interview, is Secretary of Corrections Cheryl Strange, who previously led the Washington Department of Social and Health Services and was also the CEO of Western State Hospital. Welcome to the program. Welcome back to the program. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you, Austin. Thank you.
Especially as we talk about you winding down your career.
Yes.
Before we begin, some fast facts about Washington's Department of Corrections. This is an agency that operates 11 prisons with just over 14,000 incarcerated individuals. Another more than 13,000 people are on active supervision in the community. Nearly 94% of inmates in Washington prisons are men. More than half are white. 18% are black, which is nearly 5 times higher than Washington's black population. Hispanics and Native Americans are also overrepresented in Washington prisons. 1 in 5 inmates is serving a life sentence, and the average recidivism rate, meaning people who come back to prison within 3 years of getting out, is about 20%, which is lower than it used to be. Let's just begin with your career arc, because you are about to sunset. You are about to retire when the Governor Inslee leaves office, making room for a new Secretary of Corrections. But remind us of how you began your state service. It's not a 40-year career, it's a 20-year career.
That's right. I came to work, Austin, for the state of Washington at the age of 40. My first job with the state of Washington was at the Department of Social and Health Services. I think I am a nurse and a therapist by licensure, and I spent most of my career in the world of mental health or health, as well as healthcare, and found myself at 40 years old as the executive director of an agency in Bellevue, and heard about a job with the state involving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental illness. And I thought, you know what, that is something very near and dear to my heart, something I knew a little bit about. And I came to work for the state of Washington, and I spent about, I want to say, 7 years at DSHS, both in the Division of Developmental Disabilities and then the Mental Health Division before I came over to DOC.
Again, you served as CEO of Western State Hospital.
Yes.
At a very pivotal time for that institution. You were DSHS Secretary and now DOC Secretary. Your role at the cabinet level and at the CEO level overlapped with Governor Inslee's 12 years in office, and I am curious, really his second 2 terms. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with the governor. He clearly trusts you. When he had a need and needed to put somebody in charge, he often turned to you. So help us understand how trust was built and how you think he saw the value you could add. He didn't give you easy jobs.
No, he did not. Really, with Governor Inslee, the first time I met him was when Western State was on his mind. And
there had been an assault or an escape,
there was
very high profile.
Yeah, I think those escapes happened right around that same time. He had concerns about Western. He took an interest.
He felt like, this was an institution in the news. It was in the news for not good reasons. It seemed like there was perhaps a crisis or a management gap there. Something was going on.
Yeah, and he, I think Governor Inslee was very interested in advancing behavioral health, mental health in our state. I mean, under Governor Inslee, we went from 48th in the nation of psychiatric services to 33rd in a very short period of time under his leadership. That took a lot to do. My role was to help him, advise him. He had heard that I knew about mental health, and it really started with a conversation with him in Seattle about what was going on at Western. And I spoke with him in a conversation about my thoughts about what was going on at Western. And he asked me to help. And when a governor asks you to step in and help, you give it some, my first question was, can I really do this? Can I do what he needs doing? And I thought, well, I'll certainly try. And I had those kind of conversations with him. So it was just the right time. And we had a lot of conversations about Western. He was very supportive of the work. And that began the relationship. I think we have similar values in the sense of doing the right thing and hard work.
That hospital lost accreditation,
Yes.
and with it, a lot of federal money.
Yeah.
That was a setback no governor would want. And I can't recall, were you CEO at the time?
I became CEO after Western lost
Got
its
it.
accreditation.
Okay, so that was the timeline. So that was another thing that was going on when he needed new leadership. So you come in that environment where it's lost accreditation and there have been escapes. It's been in the news. And it's an old facility.
Yes.
And by the way, now the state is just starting to break ground on a new forensic hospital on the campus of Western State. But this is not a place that it may go out of the news for a while and then it's back in the news. It's a constant
It is.
work in progress.
It is.
What's your observation? What's the reality check about a place like that?
The reality check is the state has an obligation to take care of individuals that others don't or can't. And the state will always play a role in taking care of its most vulnerable citizens. Part of the legislative process and appropriation of funds comes into play. Western was in rough shape. It had gone through the 2008, 9, 10 budget cuts.
Yep.
I was at Department of Corrections as the deputy during that time when Governor Gregoire had to do the 1%, the 3%, and the 6.25 across the board cuts. Those are serious cuts. And it comes with a price, and Western paid that price. But Western is a lightning rod for the problems with mental illness and the lack of health care for those
Workforce
folks.
shortages.
Workforce shortages, and the building. I mean, it had lost accreditation, and that doesn't happen in one fell swoop. That happens over time.
One of the things that I think the tax-paying public will see that and say, people aren't doing their jobs. Something's wrong. Somebody needs to be held to account. Look at all these problems. And, the headlines reflect that, right? These are not easy jobs when you are on the receiving end. The union's mad at you, so on and so forth. From your perspective in the hot seat for so long, do you think how would you either reframe that view or that perception or those headlines or that coverage or the criticisms? Or what part of it would you say, yeah, to some extent that is true, and we need to own it?
Well, I think the latter. We all have to own this, and people are upset. And I don't take those things personally. We're trying to get done with some key initiatives. And there's only so much money to go around. And there's so many things in government that require a lot of money. And it's challenging to have enough money. The physical plan at Western, what you see today, the new hospital, that is something we worked very hard on, and that was the root cause behind our not passing certification after those, 18 months that we got from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to fix the hospital. We did a great job with that, with the exception of the physical plant. It was a big disappointment to Governor Inslee. It was a big disappointment to me. And yet, here we are, we have a new hospital.
Well, we'll have a new hospital.
Yes.
It'll take a little while to build.
Yes.
And maybe that's the other thing, is that this all seems to take so long to sort of turn the aircraft carrier. You talked about just our rankings for mental health and what has been accomplished over the governor's term of years in office, but also these changes don't happen quickly. Right. You were part of the effort to transform mental health in this state, and the governor had a 5-year timeline, and there was recent reporting in the Seattle Times that talked about what hasn't been accomplished that the governor hoped would be within 5 years. What's your observation or reflection about just how long it takes to turn the ship of state, especially in these complex areas like human services, mental health, behavioral health?
Yeah, I mean, the entire country has a problem going back to the late 60s of deinstitutionalizing individuals who are very vulnerable. So Governor Inslee has done Herculean effort in a short 12 years to go from 48th in the nation to 33rd in the nation. That's because of investments. And
that's been rather bipartisan. I mean,
yeah,
the legislature, both Ds and Rs getting together, agreeing to put billions more into the system. As you noted, the governor's pushed hard for that.
Yeah, I mean, we have the first teaching hospital in the United States.
At the University of Washington.
University of Washington, the behavioral health teaching hospital. That's huge. Secretary Menendez, current DSHS secretary, picking up the ball and carrying forward the new forensic hospital and doing all that work to get it from pre-design, design to actually breaking ground. Those are huge efforts by the legislature, by Governor Inslee, taxpayers supporting that.
You were promoted, I guess, to Secretary of DSHS after being CEO of Western State Hospital. Again, not an easy job. That is a gargantuan agency. People often say, why don't you just outsource government, privatize? Part of what DSHS does, well, it does have a lot of contracts and a lot of service providers in the communities, but on the other hand, it's also a book of business that would be very, very hard to outsource, to pay somebody to do. This is a state obligation. But you are dealing with some of, if not the most vulnerable citizens in this state. You're running programs like, from developmental disabilities on through. Just from that perspective of having been DSHS secretary, what are a couple of observations you have about that agency, the people it serves, and the ongoing challenges?
My observation is that 19,000 employees at DSHS or 9,000 employees at the Department of Corrections show up every day to work in very challenging environments, complex problems, limited resources, and they show up every day to try to do something good. These staff are amazing. What they do, their heart and soul, their skill, their ability is just mind-boggling. I never felt alone in that work, whether it was DSHS, Western, or DOC. Everybody, there are exceptions, but as a general rule, everybody shows up to do something meaningful. And I think that for DSHS, in the middle of all that, Austin, of course, was that little thing called COVID, which was huge for, I was the secretary at the first death at the care center in Kirkland. And
nursing homes were very hard hit, especially
were.
Early on.
They were. But a great number of people coming to work every day to lift the human spirit. And I have said many times, they are the unsung heroes. They forego vacations. They take their work cell phones with them when they go on vacation. They don't want to leave that client hanging. So it's very much a we thing in human services.
We're going to pivot to corrections here in a moment, but I want to ask you because there is a new administration coming in. Governor-elect Bob Ferguson will be hiring a bunch of cabinet secretaries. What do you think makes a good cabinet secretary? What makes a good secretary of DSHS or corrections? It's not something you really go to school for. Right. And, you talked about the number of employees, the complexity of the services that are being delivered, how much in many ways is not in your control. What should a governor be looking for?
I think governors look for people who can move a government to be better at supporting its citizens. And there are lots of different strategies, I think. I had the pleasure of working fairly close at the end of my time, the first time I was at DOC with the Gregoire administration. Much more exposure, obviously, with Governor Inslee. But looking for somebody who is a good public steward, somebody who cares about making Washington better, is willing to be part of a team, is willing to advance policy agendas that make sense, following science. Governor Inslee was so strong on science and so dedicated. You work hard as a cabinet member. I did, and many do. I don't know any cabinet members who aren't working hard. Some have different challenges than others, but the heart for the job, the love of the people, and caring about doing a good job. And I think that combination, and then the rest is chemistry. Getting along with feeling like you can communicate well and that it's a team.
In these jobs, do you feel like you're sometimes only one crisis away from being fired, one prison riot, one escape, one patient dying, and the boss, the governor's on the phone saying, "What happened? This is bad for the people involved. It's bad for me."
I've been fortunate. Governor Inslee, when I think it's very important to make sure that you're communicating well with the governor's office, because that's part of the job, is letting the governor and his executive team know what your challenges are and what you're trying to do about them, and being able to express concern, being able to express a willingness to jump in and fix it. I always try to let the governor know ahead of time. Governor's
no
office.
surprise rule?
No surprise rule, Austin. But I have been lucky in that Governor Inslee has, when I have had to call with some tough stuff, not passing certification with Western.
Because they came back in and re-audited.
They did, and we had passed what we call our healthcare tags and our behavioral health tags, but we totally lost it on what they call K tags, which is the physical plant.
So you're trying to right the ship. You're hoping you can get recertified, and you have to tell him, "Sorry, we're short this time."
I think we're short this time, sir. And he's like, "What do we need to do next?" So being part of his team, it was a busy. It is a busy. We're working hard still, right through the January 15th.
What is so I asked you about what governors should look for in these positions. What about advice to successors, whether it's DOC, DSHS? I've read, I think it was the Idaho, they have the Department of Health and Welfare there, who said, it's such a big agency, and I hope I'm paraphrasing this correctly, said you really have to focus on a discrete number of priorities, and there's only so much you're going to be able to do in your term. How did you approach this? What do you think is the best strategy for somebody who's helming such a big, complex agency?
My staff will tell you, whether it was at DSHS or whether it was before I came into government, I've never worked so hard as I did working for Cheryl Strange, and I never had so much fun and felt so that our work was important. So I do believe that is a piece of it, is inspiring people, describing the why. I think that people are looking for something to believe in, and caring for them goes a very long way. And you're right, you can't be a person who, my father would say, you can't jump on your horse and run off in all directions, Cheryl. But you can jump on that horse and you can run off in a lot of directions and support people in moving in those directions. We have, I was looking through a list of things, pages and pages of people, empowering people to fix what they see and to be rowing in a same direction. I think you can get a lot of things done in lots of corners. I have 5 different administrations. Every single one of them has been working from day one on moving the needle, and with very important aspects, whether it's conditions of confinement, better health care, community safety. What are we missing? Creating an environment of teamwork and collaboration. And I get to mirror that because that's how Governor has been.
So in this role as Secretary of Corrections, you have come through also COVID and managing that and the disruption of fairly significant shrinkage in the number of people incarcerated in Washington prisons, kind of through that same area to the point that we actually closed a prison in the state, the large correctional facility. It looks like the numbers are bumping back up, but I often ask you in these interviews, like, if you look at the continuum and the timeline, where are we today? What is the story you would tell about corrections at the end of 2024? What's the trend line? What's the top line? What's the headline?
What's the headline of corrections? The headline is, there's a lot changing in the universe today across the United States. What is the temperament of the need for redemption and public safety and the science behind reentry, which I'm very excited about, moving the needle down to really we're at like 22%. The nation is at 37%. We've been at 33,
and that's for recidivism.
Yeah, recidivism. That is...
Yeah, and that didn't budge for a long time.
Right, and that is, the proof is in the pudding. You know, the science of a livable wage job. If you are going to take a bite out of crime, so to speak, then you have to replace it with something. You know, you have to have a livable wage job. You have to have a place to live. You have to have access to health care, you know.
And when you say reentry, you're talking about the fact that there needs to be a glide path, a transition, so that people aren't, in the old days it was, here's a bus ticket,
right,
a little bit of cash maybe in your pocket.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck, right?
Good luck.
And we know that 97% of people are going to get out at some point. So this focus on a soft landing.
Yeah, I mean, it's focusing on what would it take for you and I to live successfully in the community, and a place to live, access to a doctor when we need one, somebody who's looking out for us.
A job, transportation.
And a job.
You know,
So you have to get at the practicality of crime. But what's in store for today, that in 2024, we're holding steady. Yes, there's a little bit of an uptick in, we see it a lot in juveniles. We see it a lot, the drug challenges. Drug addiction is a big issue. So we have open beds. We're holding capacity, but as you know, as the state looks at its expenditures, you know, and where do we have to help with some of the deficit that we're looking at today? I have unused capacity. And I think we're getting smarter with sentence alternatives and different kinds of monitoring and accountability.
Do you think, could you see another facility closing?
I could.
And is there one that's the most obvious next one?
No, there isn't. But I think we have, given all the opportunities the legislature's put in sentence alternatives, some of the technology we have now, real-time GPS tracking, community supervision, moving to more of a mentoring, coaching, but holding accountability, and this science of reentry, this concept that we can actually influence public safety by implementing a formula that works, regardless of how people feel about it. You can't argue with the science. Washington State got to 22%. That's huge. And the national average 33. It's there's a less need for minimum camp beds. But I also think we're in the middle of a transition, both at the state level and also the federal level.
Do you have a sense that the pendulum might also be swinging back, that because people are concerned about crime, and that there might be, I don't know that this legislature or the incoming governor would, in a blue state like this, would not necessarily crack down and lengthen sentences and then drive your numbers. But do you have any sense that you might need those beds?
Yes. We have a process by which we can warm close beds. The state is always in need of some type of bed.
Yeah.
It's very challenging in the communities where people are concerned about having mentally ill or individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system living in the neighborhood. So the state tends to hang on to its properties, and it seems prudent to me
that you could essentially mothball a facility.
You can,
and then if you needed it, wanted to repurpose it.
You could, we call that warm closure, and keep the lights on and the heat on, so to speak, so it doesn't turn into a moth infested.
Just to be clear, is your agency, as part of your budget requests, although this wouldn't be, will you be recommending closure of a facility?
We were asked by the Office of Financial Management to draw up some potential budget reductions. We didn't have a lot of time to put that together, as we often don't. We have worked with the leadership team and others to kind of really, again, we didn't have a lot of time. So we came up with some things, and the obvious, before you start cutting programs or infrastructure, things like that, you look at what do you have laying around. And I would say that we have capacity in some of our reentry centers and in some of our prison facilities.
Let's just take a brief break. When we return, we'll continue our exit interview with Washington Secretary of Corrections, Cheryl Strange, back right after this.
Our leaders were very hesitant when we started this, and now I watch them and they celebrate it. They are very proud of what we've accomplished, and that model is not talked about just in Washington State. This is talked about nationally, and that, to me, that's what makes me most proud.
We learned to work together. We learned to listen to each other, and we learned respect and how to seek solutions.
And welcome back. Joining me once again is Washington Secretary of Corrections, Cheryl Strange. And before we move on, I do want to ask you about, you alluded to both a new governor and a new president. President-elect Trump is talking about a very aggressive deportation program of people who are in this country illegally. A couple of questions about the role, what will be asked of states. He's talked about deploying National Guard, for instance, but is there, for people who are incarcerated currently, who are undocumented, what currently happens and what could change depending on what the Trump administration does, the incoming Trump administration does?
Yeah, our state has always been a sanctuary state. Governor Inslee's made that very clear. The right to work in Washington has always been about our willingness to be a sanctuary state. There's a lot of protections for people in Washington. With the Department of Corrections, we do maintain a list of, we know people's immigration status, and the ICE, or Homeland Security, gets a list of all admissions to the Department of Corrections, and some of those individuals may have a detainer on them. We don't participate with them in that. And if they come to greet somebody when they leave or want to interview somebody, that is fully left up to the incarcerated individual to choose to meet with them or not. We don't get involved in calling ICE when somebody is
Being released.
Being released.
So there's not a handoff.
There is not an official handoff. But again, they do know when somebody's being admitted.
Do you have a sense then, or has there been some talk and some strategizing and planning that includes your agency about how Washington State might respond if, for instance, initially what he does is he says people with criminal convictions need to go?
I think at this point, depending on, we'll look to the governor-elect,
Yeah,
who will
so
be
obviously a new
governor by then,
administration coming in,
to provide the agency's direction on that. Governor Inslee has certainly done his part to protect. Austin, I was at DSHS during the Trump administration, and their involvement in immigration, but also our safety net programs we fought hard to maintain our safety net programs like SNAP and TANF, housing, essential needs housing, and we're, I believe, prepared to do that again.
Where the state will have to step in and backfill.
The state will have to protect and fight. I've certainly heard Governor-elect Ferguson and AG-elect Nick Brown talk about their commitment to being a safe place in Washington. So I have confidence that will continue.
I want to ask you about solitary confinement in the prisons, which has gotten a lot of headlines and a lot of attention. The agency, a year ago, or last year, announced plans to reduce solitary confinement by 90% over 5 years, contingent on getting the funding needed to do so. You have successfully reduced, and maybe you have some updated numbers for us. At the same time, a lot of the headlines, and there's been reports by the state corrections ombuds, for instance, saying a lot of people are still being held in solitary confinement. So there's that tension, right? You guys are trying to do this, you have a lofty goal, but you have your critics saying it's not happening fast enough.
Yeah, I think, reducing solitary confinement is a very complex challenge, which is why I said, we can do this in 5 years contingent on funding. I can tell you we have not received all the funds that we have asked for by any stretch of the imagination, but the staff have been very clever. And I'm looking at some latest stats today, Austin. We have 300 people in maximum custody, and that's a layman's term, if you will. It's a custody level that sort of implies that you're in the highest level of custody you can be in, and you're out just very little.
Is it as much as 23 hours a day and then an hour
Yeah,
of rec time?
the Mandela International Standards and the American Correctional Association say 2 hours out of cell, you're no longer classified as being in solitary confinement. We said in Washington, 2 hours, it's not enough. Let's go for 4. So that, again, following the science, meaningful programming. So 50% of our 300 people in max custody are out 2 hours a day out of cell. Half of those, so another 150 of those, are out 3 hours a day. That is significant. That is significant time out of cell. And if we were following the Mandela standards, we would darn near be there. That's the long-term max custody. I think the Office of Correctional Ombuds really looked not only at max custody, but that short-term, what we call administrative segregation.
Yes, right.
Is kind of think of it as a jail within the prison. Something happens, something not so great, some sort of criminal or violence or, not following significant rules. We got to separate you. We got to figure out what's going on. So I kind of like to think about that as a little bit of a jail within the correctional setting. And, but so that is the population that I think has caused that churn in that Office of Correctional Ombuds report. Dr. Robertson and her staff have been really looking into that. We have our own report coming out. You know, we have a contractor, Falcon, who is made up of correctional experts across the country, including one of our former secretaries, Bernie Warner.
Oh, yeah.
Doing a lot of work on, so we have our report coming out, and I think that will be real enlightening for people who are following this issue.
So is your contention that you're being dinged because of administrative segregation, and that doesn't kind of show that from your view, the reduction in solitary confinement is getting clouded or shrouded by people pointing to the number of people going into administrative seg?
No, I think solitary confinement is solitary confinement.
Whether you're there
long-term or short-term.
Yeah.
And people who misbehave, that frequency, they might be there for a few days. And there are a lot of administrative procedures and safeguards. We try to hit 15 days max in that space. But, you know, there are things that interfere with that 15 days. Sometimes it's on the DOC, and sometimes it's the incarcerated individual wants to bring in a special witness, or, you know, it's procedural. It's interesting. But we have visitation opportunities. We have tablets in solitary now. We have yard. We have a yard. That's the big expense, is the yard redo. But we've come a long way.
So what would you say at this point in terms of, given that you haven't gotten all the funding, what are the prospects of reaching that 90% over 5 years?
Yeah, that's to be determined. We do need money to do this. We can't do it on...
Because you need more staff?
We need more staff. We need, yes.
Some remodeling or something?
We need some capital improvements. We need yards. We need more staff to accompany these individuals to come out.
They're more resource-intensive individuals.
Yeah, and
if somebody's on vacation or you don't have the staffing on a particular day, then
that's
you
right.
lose your hour or two. It affects people getting out.
Right. You can't, I mean, anybody can unlock a door and let somebody out. How is that helping that individual? People in solitary confinement are in that cohort that get out, 97%. They're going to get out. So they need time out of cell, but they need legitimate time, programming, supports, cognitive behavioral interventions, treatment. Like I said, we've got this, you know, programming and recreation yards and visitation. You know, I've said before how important visitation is to somebody.
This also dovetails into mental health. We know that suicides among people who are in solitary confinement, the rate of suicide is higher for those individuals. So access to mental health care, access to counselors, and then that also leads to access to health care more globally, which the agency's also been criticized for over the years. What can you say about, in your term of service, your ability to move the needle or move the ball on healthcare services, including mental health?
Well, globally, healthcare, we have moved from day one into a new model of healthcare delivery. We call it the patient-centered medical home. It's really a managed care model where every incarcerated individual has a primary care doctor. And
like you would theoretically outside of prison.
That's right. That's right. And so there's a team. We have focused heavily on patient-centered medical home, which has been a leaning out so that every health clinic looks exactly the same. The supplies are exactly where they are. Simple things like that.
What if somebody gets moved to a different prison, which happens quite a lot?
Yeah, I mean, their records go along with them. Their
Are they
box of records.
You don't have electronic records.
We do
You have
not
not been
yet.
able to.
We're working hard at that. We have. I'm hopeful that we will see one very shortly. It's building a medical record is. We must have an electronic record.
But right now it is a box.
That has been one of my. Whining things about. I'm a member of the Governor's Health Subcabinet and Human Services Coalition, and we're all hammering about that.
Yeah. So electronic health records notwithstanding, you you feel like healthcare has, I mean, the agency's been sued over this, sued
Yes.
over missed cancer diagnoses. You've had situations with provider care, quality of care.
Yeah, and COVID, the access, is almost impossible. I see the timelines, even in some of the liability cases, I see timelines of, that was pretty quick in comparison to getting in. Dr. Curl, our chief medical officer, has worked really hard to bring in new physicians. We have done a great job of getting healthcare practitioners into the DOC, so I'm really excited about that. When it comes to behavioral health, though, Austin, we're in the same boat as many, enough providers, worker shortage. We've done some improvements to the penitentiary in Monroe, protection efforts in our bars unit. We have a new, again, it isn't built yet, but we have funding, and we've done the pre-site and the site design for a new inpatient unit at Monroe. I think that's where it's going to be, and that's really important. Shortly after I got here, I picked up the phone and I reached out to Dr. Homer Venters, who served on Biden-Harris's COVID task force for corrections, and I just cold called him and asked him if he'd come out and take a look around and help advise me on investments and direction. And he happened to have a break in a court case. He flew out for 4 days, and spending that time with him, that was very valuable in terms of setting a trajectory, and we've been working towards that. And he validated a lot of the things we were doing and encouraged us to get to it on some other things around an electronic health record, things like that.
What is the trend around prison suicide?
I think we continue to be, we knock on wood, we haven't had, we had that period where we had what we call a suicide cluster. It was very heartbreaking. In terms of percentages, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Prisons are places where suicides run high. We've put in some protective strategies and factors in that, doing a lot more assessing up front when somebody comes in. Again, people are coming to us from jail. We don't have a lot of information. So we're just having to take these universal kind of precautions that treat every patient like they might be have mental health problems. So
delegations have gone to Norway to see how they run their prisons. What have you learned? What are you enacting here that's borrowed from Norway?
I think language concept is sort of what we have. It's that human-centered design, that relationship. You don't have to, the concept in Norway is people go to court to be punished. They go to prison to become better neighbors. And that really resonated with the state of Washington. And I mean, what I love about it is you don't give up accountability for the crime. That's what you go to court for. The loss of your civil liberties, living in a prison, the fears and the dangers and the loneliness of that is punishment. And the Norway model talks about how to normalize an individual, how to protect individuals, teach them new skills, so that dynamic security is a concept along with normalization and progression that just means you've done this heinous crime, yes, and you are in prison. How can we make you a better neighbor? A lot of trauma-informed care, not at the expense of accountability. I think that's a really misnomer about how people think about this.
Well, and I'm curious about how this frontline staff has responded to this. I've seen some interviews with some that have kind of embraced this idea, but security and safety in these facilities for the staff members top of mind.
It absolutely
and,
is.
It's not like everybody's in a cell and
That's
the
right.
correctional officer's walking down the cell block and just waving. There's a lot of potential interaction. You sometimes have one or two individuals, correctional officers, for a pod of people. So they're vulnerable.
They are very vulnerable, and this is the science behind good correctional practice. You have to run safe, humane prisons. If you are not 100% focused on safe and humane, there will be problems. And you see that across the country. Lack of investments. It's very important to have good, sound correctional practices as a basis for safety. And I go and speak at a lot of our Correctional Worker Academy graduations, and I look, those families are there. It's oftentimes the first child to go to college. They are a correctional officer. They have a good paying job with the state. They can make a career out of it. They can sit in the secretary chair someday. And I look those families in the eye and I tell them, please know that your children's safety, your son or daughter's safety is top of mind for the Department of Corrections and for the state of Washington. So that's number one. Also, correctional officers, let us remember with MEND or the Norway system, it's also about correctional worker wellness. Correctional workers go to prison too. It's a dark place. We need to liven them up. You see art on some of the walls. You're starting to see paint of different colors. You see a golf program at Cedar Creek Correctional Center. We're starting to do some of these things, recognizing that we need to start helping people become better neighbors. And that means oftentimes us being better neighbors too.
Is there any chance, because there have been periods of prison reform over the decades, that this goes too far, that the pendulum swings back, that this is an experiment, a moment in time, but not a trajectory? Or are you confident this is a trajectory and not just a trend or a fad?
I'm confident that it's a winning strategy to be human-centered and give an incarcerated individual hope. I think that we are in the age of enlightenment in this country with hope and kindness, and these kind of things really matter, and they can make or break a situation. And again, incarcerated folk, they come to prison, they do their time, and while we have them, we really owe it to the public. This is public safety 101. And I think that's an important aspect to this.
I want to ask about shutting down Washington State's death chamber, which happened in September.
Yes.
We haven't had the death penalty in the state for some time, but
Right.
this was the formal, not just mothballing, but retiring of this, symbolically and otherwise. What was that like? What was the significance of that? And
Yeah,
mind you that there are those who don't think that this is the direction the state should have gone. I think the death penalty should still be available and an option.
Well, the Supreme Court has, come out and said no. We have 78 individuals have been executed in the chamber at the Washington State Penitentiary. There's a plaque, and Austin, I think this is very significant. Of course, TVW was there and has the film of the closure, the governor's remarks, the ceremony, the prayer.
By the way, this is at the state penitentiary in Walla Walla.
Yes. There's a statement that Governor Inslee said, and it's on the plaque that hangs in there in the chamber. The chamber is intact. It serves an important historical bookmark, I think. And it says, when the ultimate decision is death, there is too much at stake to accept an imperfect system. And that is the fundamental issue. Governor Inslee talked about that in his remarks about two people commit a crime, a heinous crime. They come from two different areas in the state. One gets life with the possibility of parole, the other gets death. And it's an imperfect system to know 100%. And so it's high stakes. And, DOC is obliged to carry out the sentence of the court. It's been hard on the staff. We had our last execution in September of 2010. I was at DOC at that time and involved in that effort. It's difficult work carrying out that particular sentence. So as an employer, I'm glad that the state staff don't have to do that. I think it's hard to ask people to do that. I think it's an unfair and just system if you there's too much at stake if it's not perfect.
So in the few minutes we have left, I do want you to reflect a little bit on your career, on this transition, perhaps on advice for your successor. I asked about, or I mentioned at the introduction, proudest accomplishments, things left undone. I don't know if there's any failures on your list, but where would you, as you sum this up and think about?
Yeah, again, I think government is, people come and staff are asked, cabinet members are asked to do complex things. My deepest regret is that in these jobs, whether you're a governor, even 12 years, there's never enough time to get everything done from beginning to end. You come, you work hard, you make your mark, and then you move on, and the next person comes on and does that. They say there's a secretary for every time, and every time a secretary, and I kind of resonate with that. I came at an interesting time. I was willing to help and had a whole bunch of people around who thought we could get something done, and we got a lot of it done. We didn't get everything done. It's like a kitchen to me, Austin. You can leave a kitchen clean when you leave at night and you've got everything all cleaned up, and the next morning it's fired up again and it's a whole new set of things to do in that kitchen. And so it's been just a real privilege and an honor to be able to be a part of it.
What about advice for whether it's somebody stepping into the Secretary of Corrections office or position, or DSHS, or just any state agency, given your breadth of experience? What should they know? What should they prepare for? What do you wish you had known? My comments to how to help, what to do, rely on people. You are not expected to know everything. Do not make that mistake of feeling like you can't ask somebody or that you can't admit you're stuck. That is a beautiful thing when a leader can say, I am not sure, let's talk about this. There's lots of different choices, let's talk about it. But thinking that it's all on you to solve and you alone, bring in people, surround yourself around people who are in it for the same reason you are, and don't be afraid to talk it out. And that would be my big advice. There's magnetic north and true north, and you can get kind of caught off guard. Try to stay humble. And people defer to you a lot, and they, you get used to that. So you stay away from that kind of stuff. Just in the few seconds we have left, I know you've been appointed to the National Institute of Corrections Advisory Board by the current Attorney General Merrick Garland, but what else are you going to be doing in retirement?
That is a great question.
Or preferment, as some people call it.
Yeah, that is a good question. I'll tell you, I plan on maybe taking a little trip here and there. I've always said this is a lifestyle. These jobs, they're not a job, they're a lifestyle. Mm-hmm. This kind of work is an extreme sport, and it's my extreme sport, and I've really enjoyed it. Take a little time, get down to one cell phone, maybe one car, and just kind of think about what's next. I'm excited about the National Institute of Corrections. I think people like me and those that have been around a long time or a short time and tried to do some things need to be available to those people who are just kind of getting started.
So you'll answer that one phone?
I will. I absolutely will, Austin.
We're going to stop it there. Secretary Cheryl Strange, thank you for the exit interview. Good luck
Thank you.
for this next chapter. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We will see you again next week.